The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of Haven's Rest when the alien ships appeared in the sky. Jake Morrison looked up from checking his irrigation lines and squinted at the dark shapes blocking out portions of the blue atmosphere above. The ships were big and ugly with sharp edges and weapon ports that stuck out like angry thorns. Jake counted 12 of them hanging in the air like storm clouds that refused to move. His wife Lisa stepped out of their farmhouse and shielded her eyes to get a better look at the visitors. She was carrying a basket of wet clothes that she had planned to hang on the line behind their home. The alien ships did not seem to bother her much. She walked to the clothesline and began pinning up shirts and pants as if nothing unusual was happening above her head. Down the dirt road that connected the Morrison farm to the rest of the settlement, old Pete Williams continued working on his broken harvester. The machine made loud clanking sounds as Pete hit it with a wrench. He did not even glance up at the alien fleet. Pete had been fixing farm equipment for 40 years, and he was not about to let some visitors from space interrupt his work schedule. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared down at the human colony through the large viewing screen. His forearms crossed over his armored chest as he studied the peaceful scene below. The planet looked exactly like the intelligence reports had described it. No orbital defense platforms, no military bases, no weapon installations of any kind. Just farms and small towns scattered across green continents like seeds thrown by a careless hand. The Admiral's tactical officer approached with a data pad in his clawed hands. The young Zalari officer's scales gleamed under the bridge lights as he spoke in their musical language. He reported that initial scans showed approximately 50,000 humans living on Haven's Rest. Most of them seemed to be engaged in agriculture or mining operations. There were no signs of a military presence anywhere on the planet. Kethvar nodded with satisfaction. This would be another easy conquest for the Zalari Empire. The humans would surrender quickly when they saw the superior firepower hanging over their heads. Then the Empire could add another world to its growing collection of tributary planets. The Admiral had conquered 17 worlds using this same approach, and he expected number 18 to follow the same pattern. The communications officer signaled that their surrender demand was ready for transmission. Kethvar straightened his ceremonial armor and prepared to deliver the message that would make these humans into subjects of the Empire. He had given this speech so many times that he could recite it without thinking about the words. Down on Haven's Rest, Jake Morrison heard his communication device beep with an incoming message. He pulled the small device from his belt and activated the screen. A reptilian face appeared and began speaking in accented but understandable human language. The alien admiral explained that the humans were now under the protection of the Zalari Empire. They had 1 hour to surrender unconditionally or face the consequences of resistance. Jake listened to the entire message with the same expression he used when checking weather reports. When the transmission ended, he walked over to where Lisa was hanging clothes and showed her the device. She watched the recorded message while continuing to pin up their laundry. When it finished, she shrugged and went back to her work. Their neighbor, Pete Williams, had apparently received the same message, because he called out from his position next to the broken harvester. His voice carried easily across the quiet morning air. He asked Jake if he had seen the announcement from their uninvited guests. Jake confirmed that he had received the surrender demand. Pete chuckled and went back to hitting his machine with the wrench. He mentioned that the visitors seemed to have poor manners. In his experience, most polite folks introduced themselves before making demands. Jake agreed that the aliens could have been more courteous in their approach. Lisa suggested that someone should probably respond to the message. It would be rude to leave their visitors hanging without any kind of answer. Jake nodded and activated his communication device. He sent a reply directly to the alien flagship. Admiral Kethvar expected to receive a panicked plea for mercy or perhaps an angry rejection that would justify immediate military action. Instead, he heard a calm human voice that sounded like someone discussing plans for a community picnic. The human identified himself as Jake Morrison and said that the people of Haven's Rest were peaceful folks who welcomed visitors. The aliens were welcome to land and trade, but the humans would prefer if they kept their weapons powered down because loud noises made the livestock nervous. The Admiral stared at his communication console as if it had malfunctioned. His bridge. Crew exchanged confused glances. In 17 previous conquests, no one had ever responded to a surrender demand by offering to engage in commerce. The tactical officer asked if they should proceed with the demonstration of force that usually followed rejected surrender terms. Kethvar decided that these humans needed to understand the seriousness of their situation. He ordered his weapons officer to target an empty field near the Morrison farm. They would fire a single plasma bolt into the ground as a warning shot. The explosion would create a crater large enough to be seen from orbit and would hopefully convince the humans to reconsider their casual attitude. The flagship's main cannon charged with a high-pitched whine that resonated through the ship's hull. Energy readings climbed as the weapon prepared to fire. Admiral Kethvar gave the order to discharge, and the plasma bolt launched toward the planet's surface. The brilliant beam of energy screamed through the atmosphere, trailing fire and electromagnetic disturbance. Jake Morrison looked up as the alien weapon approached his property. The plasma bolt aimed directly at his south pasture where he kept his dairy cows. He frowned slightly because cows did not like loud noises, and this would probably upset them for the rest of the day. The energy beam struck exactly where the Zalari had aimed it. But instead of creating a massive explosion, the plasma simply vanished. There was no crater, no fire, no destruction of any kind. The bolt of energy that could have leveled a city block disappeared as completely as if it had never existed. The cows in the pasture continued chewing grass without even looking up. Admiral Kethvar ordered an immediate sensor sweep of the target area. His instruments showed no evidence that a plasma bolt had ever been fired. The energy readings indicated that nothing unusual had happened anywhere on the planet's surface. His weapons officer confirmed that the cannon had fired successfully and that the bolt had definitely reached its target. Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication channel again. He sounded mildly annoyed as he explained that the visitors were making his livestock nervous with their noise. He asked someone named Mary to have her boy Danny adjust the field generators. He also mentioned that the Henderson kids should stop playing with their toys near the cattle because accidents could happen. The Admiral had no idea what field generators were or why children's toys would be relevant to the current situation. His tactical officer reported that their sensors were detecting unusual energy patterns from several locations around the human settlement. The readings did not match any known technology in the Zalari database. Kethvar ordered his fleet to maintain position while they tried to understand what had happened to their warning shot. He had never encountered a defense system that could make weapons fire simply disappear. The technology required to achieve such an effect would be far beyond anything his own military possessed. On the surface of Haven's Rest, Jake Morrison went back to checking his irrigation lines. Lisa finished hanging the laundry and went inside to start preparing lunch. Pete Williams finally got his harvester working and began testing its mechanical functions. None of them seemed particularly concerned about the alien fleet hovering overhead or the fact that they had just made a military weapon vanish into thin air. The morning continued peacefully on Haven's Rest, while 12 Zalari warships hung motionless in the sky above. Admiral Kethvar was beginning to suspect that his 18th conquest might not follow the same pattern as the previous 17. Admiral Kethvar stood frozen on his bridge as his sensor officers worked frantically to understand what had happened to their plasma bolt. The readings made no sense according to everything the Zalari military had learned about physics and energy, manipulation. Weapons fire did not simply disappear without leaving some kind of trace or residual signature. Yet their most sensitive instruments showed absolutely nothing where a city-killing explosion should have occurred. The science officer approached with trembling hands holding a data pad full of impossible readings. She explained that preliminary scans of the human settlement were producing results that contradicted known laws of thermodynamics. The devices that the humans called farming equipment were generating energy outputs that exceeded most Starship reactors. What appeared to be simple irrigation systems were actually sophisticated networks for manipulating matter at the atomic level. Kethvar demanded more detailed information about these anomalous readings. His crew began conducting deep scans of individual human structures and vehicles. The results became more disturbing with each new discovery. A barn that should have contained hay and livestock was emitting radiation signatures consistent with controlled fusion reactions. Greenhouses that appeared to grow vegetables were surrounded by exotic energy fields that could theoretically slice through planetary crust. Down in the Morrison Farms cornfield, 16-year-old Danny Brooks was indeed adjusting something near his family's crops. The device looked like a weather monitoring station with a simple metal pole and some basic electronic components. Danny had built it for a school science project about atmospheric pressure and wind patterns. At least that was what he had told his teacher when he submitted the project proposal. The device hummed quietly as Danny made small modifications to its internal programming. The sound was barely audible, but it contained harmonic frequencies that seemed to resonate with the air itself. Danny's younger sister Amy walked over to see what her brother was working on. She asked if he was still tinkering with his weather machine. Danny nodded and explained that he was trying to improve the sensitivity of the atmospheric sensors. The device could detect and manipulate electromagnetic fields across a much wider spectrum than most people realized. He had discovered that by adjusting certain frequency ranges, he could create interesting effects with local gravity and energy distribution. Amy thought this sounded boring compared to her own hobbies, but she listened politely. From the Zalari flagship, the sensors identified Danny's weather station as a gravitational manipulation device capable of affecting objects across several light-minutes of space. The energy signature matched theoretical descriptions of weapons that could move planets or redirect stellar radiation. The fact that a human child was casually adjusting such equipment while discussing school homework made Admiral Kethvar's head tentacles twitch with nervous tension. Colony Administrator Ben Carter was having his morning coffee in the settlement's main administrative building when his communication console chimed with another message from the alien fleet. Carter was a middle-aged man who had been elected to handle paperwork and coordinate community decisions. He had moved to Haven's Rest because he enjoyed the peaceful lifestyle and the chance to work with his hands growing food instead of shuffling documents in some corporate office. The Zalari Admiral appeared on Carter's screen, looking significantly less confident than he had in his original surrender demand. Kethvar requested permission to conduct more detailed scans of the human settlement to better understand their defensive capabilities. He explained that his military forces needed to assess the strategic situation before proceeding with standard first contact protocols. Carter sipped his coffee and considered the request. He saw no harm in letting the visitors examine their community more closely. Haven's Rest had nothing to hide from anyone. He granted permission for the aliens to scan whatever they wanted, but suggested that they avoid pointing sensors directly at the school during class hours, because the children found the electromagnetic interference distracting. The Zalari immediately began comprehensive scans of every human structure and device within sensor range. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about technological development and military strategy. The humans appeared to have seamlessly integrated weapons of mass destruction into their daily agricultural activities. Devices that could glass continents were being used to water crops and monitor soil conditions. In the settlement's general store, Linda Pierce was preparing for her afternoon classes at the local school. She taught mathematics and basic science to children between the ages of 6 and 16. Linda enjoyed working with young minds and watching them discover how the universe operated according to predictable mathematical principles. She believed that education was the foundation of any civilized society. Linda gathered her teaching materials for the day's lessons about energy conversion and molecular chemistry. Her equipment included several devices that she used to demonstrate scientific concepts in ways that students could easily understand. One apparatus showed how matter could be converted directly into energy through controlled nuclear reactions. Another device manipulated electromagnetic fields to create visible light displays that illustrated wave propagation principles. The Zalari sensors focused on Linda's teaching aids and immediately classified them as weapons of incredible destructive potential. The nuclear demonstration device contained enough antimatter to level several city blocks. The electromagnetic manipulator could theoretically disrupt the molecular bonds holding solid matter together. The energy readings suggested that a human school teacher was carrying equipment that could sterilize entire planets. Meanwhile, Frank Miller was conducting inventory in his general store using a handheld scanner that helped him track merchandise and calculate supply needs. The device used focused energy beams to analyze the molecular composition of various products. Frank found it useful for determining which items were running low and needed to be reordered from suppliers in other settlements. The scanner worked by breaking down small samples of material into their component atoms and then reconstructing the original structure from the resulting data. Frank had purchased it from a technology cooperative that specialized in efficient inventory management systems. He considered it an essential tool for running a successful retail operation in a frontier community. From the perspective of Zalari, military scanners, Frank's inventory device, appeared to be a molecular disintegrator capable of reducing any target to its basic atomic components. The energy signature indicated that it could penetrate most known forms of matter shielding and armor plating. A simple shopkeeper was casually using technology that could dissolve their flagship into constituent particles. Dr. Susan Walsh was reviewing patient files in the settlement's medical center when her diagnostic equipment began registering unusual electromagnetic activity from somewhere high above the planet. Her medical scanners were sensitive enough to detect biological processes at the cellular level, and they had apparently picked up the alien scanning beams as they swept across the human community. Susan found the readings interesting from a scientific perspective. The alien technology used energy frequencies that were similar to some of her own medical devices, but with much less precision and sophistication. She made notes about the electromagnetic patterns in case the information proved useful for future research into comparative technology development. The doctor's medical scanners used quantum manipulation techniques to analyze and repair biological systems at the molecular level. The devices could identify genetic abnormalities and correct them by directly adjusting DNA sequences. More advanced applications allowed for complete cellular reconstruction and even limited matter creation for replacing damaged tissue. To the Zalari observers, Dr. Walsh's medical equipment registered as technology that could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level. The theoretical applications were limitless. Such devices could unmake living beings at the molecular level or reconstruct them according to any desired specifications. A human doctor was using equipment that represented the pinnacle of matter, manipulation technology. Admiral Kethvar reviewed the sensor reports with growing alarm. Every human civilian appeared to be carrying or operating devices that exceeded the capabilities of his most advanced military hardware. Children played with gravitational manipulators. Teachers demonstrated antimatter reactions. Shopkeepers used molecular disintegrators for inventory management. Doctors casually manipulated quantum fields as part of routine medical care. The Admiral began to understand that he was not looking at a defenseless agricultural colony. He was observing a civilization that had integrated weapons of unimaginable power into their everyday civilian activities. The humans were not defenseless because they had no weapons. They were beyond the need for dedicated military equipment because their farming tools and household appliances could serve as planet-killing devices. Kethvar called an emergency meeting with his senior officers to discuss their rapidly changing assessment of the strategic situation. The humans. Admiral Kethvar found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting a meeting with beings he had originally intended to conquer. The thought of asking for permission to visit people he had planned to subjugate filled him with shame, but the sensor readings left him no choice. His military advisors had unanimously agreed that direct confrontation with the humans would result in the complete destruction of their fleet within minutes. Dr. Susan Walsh received the Admiral's request while she was finishing her morning medical rounds. The alien commander explained that he wished to discuss the current situation in person and hoped that the humans would be willing to provide some guidance about proper diplomatic protocols. Susan found his polite tone much more pleasant than his earlier demands for surrender. She consulted with Ben Carter and several other community leaders about hosting their uninvited guests. The consensus was that the aliens seemed to be learning better manners, and deserved a chance to explain themselves properly. Susan sent a reply inviting Admiral Kethvar and a small delegation to join them for coffee and conversation in the community center. The Admiral selected 3 of his most experienced officers to accompany him to the planet's surface. They left their weapons aboard the flagship and wore minimal armor to demonstrate their peaceful intentions. The shuttle ride to Haven's Rest was tense as they prepared to meet beings whose casual conversation about adjusting field generators had made their military technology seem primitive. The community center was a simple wooden building where the colonists held meetings and social gatherings. Tables and chairs were arranged in a circle to encourage open discussion. Susan Walsh waited inside with several other residents, including Jake Morrison, Ben Carter, Linda Pierce, and Frank Miller. Coffee and freshly baked cookies had been prepared for their guests. Admiral Kethvar entered the building with his 3 officers and immediately felt out of place among the friendly human faces. His armored form towered over the seated colonists, but their relaxed attitudes made him feel small and awkward. Susan gestured for the aliens to take seats and offered them refreshments. The Admiral had never experienced such casual hospitality from people he had recently threatened with conquest. Susan began the conversation by acknowledging that there seemed to be some confusion about the nature of their community and its capabilities. She explained that the humans understood why the Zolari might have mistaken Haven's Rest for a typical agricultural colony. From a distance, their settlement probably looked defenseless and vulnerable to military intervention. The doctor spoke, in the same gentle tone she used when explaining difficult medical diagnoses to concerned patients. She wanted the aliens to understand their situation without feeling threatened or embarrassed by their obvious miscalculation. Susan believed that most conflicts arose from misunderstandings that could be resolved through honest communication and mutual respect. She told the Zolari that humans had a complicated relationship with violence and warfare. Their species had spent thousands of years fighting each other over resources, territory, and ideological differences. This constant conflict had driven rapid technological advancement as each side sought advantages over their enemies. Eventually, humans became very good at creating tools for destroying each other. Jake Morrison shifted in his chair and unconsciously touched the device attached to his belt. The motion caught Admiral Kethvar's attention, and the alien sensors immediately identified the object as an extremely sophisticated weapon system. Jake noticed the Admiral's stare and smiled apologetically. He explained that old habits were hard to break even in peaceful settings. Susan continued her explanation by describing how human military technology had evolved during their expansion into space. The colonization of new worlds required settlers who could defend themselves against unknown threats. Many of the early colonies faced hostile environments, dangerous wildlife, or aggressive alien species that viewed human expansion as a territorial invasion. The tools that the colonists carried reflected thousands of years of military innovation compressed into portable devices that could be operated by civilians. Jake's sidearm used controlled gravitational collapse to create projectiles that could penetrate virtually any known material. A single shot could theoretically punch through their flagship and continue traveling until it hit something large, enough to absorb the kinetic energy. Linda Pierce added that the educational system on Haven's Rest included comprehensive training in advanced physics and engineering principles. Children learned to build and maintain the technology that their community depended on for survival. What appeared to be simple science projects were actually sophisticated applications of principles that most civilizations took centuries to discover. The device that young Danny Brooks had been adjusting in the cornfield was indeed a weather monitoring station, but it also served as a gravitational field generator that could protect the settlement from asteroid impacts, severe storms, or hostile spacecraft. Danny had built it using plans available in any standard physics textbook, but the underlying principles were advanced enough to seem like magic to less developed civilizations. Frank Miller mentioned that the general store served as more than just a retail establishment. It was also the community's technology distribution center where residents could obtain equipment for various specialized tasks. His inventory scanner was designed to analyze molecular structures for quality control purposes, but the same technology could be used to disassemble threats at the atomic level. Dr. Walsh explained that her medical equipment represented the pinnacle of human biotechnology development. The devices could diagnose and treat conditions by manipulating matter at the quantum level. They could rebuild damaged tissue, correct genetic defects, or enhance biological functions beyond natural limitations. The same technology that preserved life could theoretically unmake it with equal efficiency. Admiral Kethvar listened to these explanations with growing amazement and horror. The humans were describing military capabilities that exceeded anything in Zalari civilization, but they spoke about these weapons as if they were ordinary household tools. Their children learned to build planet-killing devices as school science projects. Their doctors carried equipment that could restructure matter at will. Susan noticed the Admiral's distressed expression and offered him more coffee. She explained that humans had learned an important lesson during their violent history. The ability to destroy did not automatically confer the right to do so. True strength came from choosing restraint even when overwhelming force was available. Wisdom meant knowing when not to use the power that you possessed. Ben Carter added that the colonists of Haven's Rest had specifically chosen to leave the militarized regions of human space. They wanted to build a community based on cooperation and mutual support rather than competition and conflict. They had brought their advanced technology with them because frontier life required sophisticated tools, but they hoped never to use these devices for their original military purposes. Jake Morrison spoke about his experiences during the conflicts that had shaped human military development. He had served in battles where entire star systems were devastated by weapons that made their current equipment seem primitive. The psychological cost of such destruction had convinced many veterans to seek peaceful alternatives to constant warfare. Humans had discovered that possessing ultimate military superiority was meaningless if it came at the cost of becoming monsters. They had chosen to use their advanced technology for creation rather than destruction. Growing food and raising families required the same scientific principles as building weapons, but the results brought joy instead of death. Linda Pierce explained that education was their most important weapon against the cycle of violence that had dominated human history. By teaching children to understand the universe through scientific inquiry rather than military necessity, they hoped to create a generation that would choose exploration over conquest. Knowledge should be used to build better communities, not more efficient methods of killing. Susan concluded by emphasizing that the humans of Haven's Rest genuinely preferred peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. They would defend themselves, if threatened, but they would much rather share their knowledge and resources with species that approach them with honest intentions. The choice between conflict and cooperation was now entirely up to the Zalari. Admiral Kethavar sat in stunned silence as he processed everything the humans had told him. His conception of military power and strategic thinking had been completely overturned in the span of a single conversation. These people could have destroyed his fleet without effort, but instead they had invited him for coffee and cookies while patiently explaining why violence was counterproductive. He was beginning to understand that the humans represented something entirely new in his experience. They were not just another species with advanced technology. They were beings who had transcended the need to prove their strength through conquest and had chosen to demonstrate their civilization through compassion. Instead, Admiral Kethavar struggled to process the information that the humans had shared during their coffee meeting. His military training had prepared him for conventional warfare against opponents who followed predictable strategic patterns. The humans of Haven's Rest operated according to principles that seemed to contradict everything he understood about power and conflict resolution. They possessed overwhelming force, but chose restraint. They could have destroyed his fleet instantly, but instead offered hospitality and education. The Admiral's confusion must have been obvious, because Dr. Susan Walsh suggested that a practical demonstration might help clarify the situation. She explained that abstract descriptions of human capabilities could be difficult to understand without seeing the technology in actual operation. The colonists would be happy to show their visitors some examples of everyday equipment being used for its intended, peaceful purposes. Ben Carter agreed that demonstrations would be more helpful than continued explanations. He mentioned that several residents were working on community projects that afternoon and would welcome the opportunity to show their alien guests how human technology functioned in real-world applications. The aliens would be able to observe normal colonial activities while gaining a better understanding of what they were really dealing with. Young Danny Brooks volunteered to go first with what he called his county fair science project. The teenager led the group outside to the cornfield, where his weather monitoring station continued its quiet humming. Danny explained that he had originally built the device to study atmospheric pressure variations, but had gradually expanded its capabilities to include more sophisticated environmental monitoring functions. He activated a handheld control interface and began making adjustments to the device's operational parameters. Danny explained that the station could detect and influence electromagnetic fields across a wide spectrum of frequencies. By modulating these fields, he could create localized effects that were useful for agricultural purposes and weather prediction. He wanted to show how the technology could be used to solve practical problems without causing any harm. The Admiral and his officers watched with growing amazement as Danny's adjustments began affecting their shuttlecraft parked nearby. The small vessel started rising gently into the air without any visible means of propulsion. It rotated slowly and moved sideways before settling into a new position about 50 meters from its original location. The movement was smooth and controlled, as if an invisible hand was carefully repositioning a toy. Danny looked pleased with the results and explained that gravitational field manipulation was useful for moving heavy objects around the farm. His family used the system to relocate equipment and supplies without needing mechanical lifting devices. The same technology that had just moved their spacecraft could be scaled up to relocate buildings, redirect rivers, or adjust the orbital characteristics of small moons. The Zalari officers quickly checked their instruments and confirmed that their shuttle had indeed been moved by external gravitational forces. The energy required for such an operation should have been detectable across several star systems, but their sensors registered only minimal power fluctuations from Danny's weather station. The teenager was casually demonstrating technology that exceeded their theoretical understanding of physics. Linda Pierce offered to show the next demonstration using what she called her classroom volcano experiment. The school teacher produced a small handheld device that looked like a simple scientific calculator. She explained that students used it to observe stellar formation processes and nuclear reaction principles. The device could create miniature examples of cosmic phenomena for educational purposes. Linda activated the device, and a tiny point of brilliant light appeared hovering in the air above her palm. The light grew brighter and began exhibiting the characteristic spectral emissions of a small star. Heat radiated from the controlled fusion reaction, while electromagnetic fields contained the energy within a sphere roughly the size of a marble. The miniature star burned steadily for exactly 3 7/10 seconds before safely extinguishing itself. She explained that the duration was carefully calculated to provide students with enough observation time while avoiding any risk of accidentally igniting the planetary atmosphere. The fusion reaction was completely contained and posed no danger to anyone in the immediate vicinity. However, the same principles could theoretically be used to create much larger and more persistent stellar phenomena if circumstances ever required such extreme measures. Admiral Kethvar stared at the spot where the artificial star had briefly existed. His instruments had detected fusion reactions, exotic particle emissions, and energy signatures that matched actual stellar cores. A human, Schoolteacher had just created and controlled a miniature sun using equipment that she carried in her pocket. The implications were staggering from both scientific and military perspectives. Colony engineer Carol Stone approached the group and apologized for interrupting, but explained that she needed assistance with a local infrastructure problem. She pointed toward a mountain range in the distance and explained that one of the peaks was interfering with their water distribution system. The mountain blocked optimal flow patterns for their irrigation network and needed to be relocated to improve agricultural efficiency. Carol had been planning to move the problematic mountain about 50 kilometers to the west, where it would not interfere with water flow. However, the community had voted to postpone the project until after harvest season because underground excavation might disturb the root systems of their vegetable crops. She wondered if their alien visitors might be willing to help with the relocation project. The Zalari officers exchanged glances of barely controlled panic. The human engineer was casually discussing mountain relocation as if she were talking about rearranging furniture. Their sensors confirmed that the peak in question was approximately 8,000 meters tall and composed of solid granite. Moving such a massive geological feature would require energy outputs comparable to small stellar explosions. Carol noticed their expressions and quickly reassured them that the project was not urgent. The current irrigation system was functional, even with the mountain in its present location. The relocation was more of a long-term optimization project that could wait until they had finished more pressing agricultural tasks. She did not want their guests to feel pressured into helping with heavy manual labor. Dr. Susan Walsh decided to conclude the demonstrations by showing some examples of her medical technology. She produced a device that resembled a simple diagnostic scanner and explained that it was used for analyzing biological systems at the cellular level. The equipment could identify genetic abnormalities, viral infections, or tissue damage that might not be apparent during conventional physical examinations. The doctor activated the scanner and pointed it toward one of the alien officers. The device immediately began displaying detailed information about Zalari physiology, including genetic structure, metabolic processes, and neurological activity patterns. Susan noted several minor health issues that could be easily corrected with appropriate treatment. She offered to demonstrate therapeutic applications if any of their guests were interested in experiencing human medical technology. The scanned officer backed away nervously as he realized that the human doctor's equipment had analyzed his entire biological structure in a matter of seconds. The device had penetrated his armor and clothing to examine systems that even Zalari medical science could barely detect. Dr. Walsh possessed technology that could read and potentially rewrite the fundamental characteristics of living beings. Susan noticed his discomfort and quickly deactivated the scanner. She explained that medical privacy was very important to humans and that she would never conduct detailed scans without explicit patient consent. The demonstration had been intended to show diagnostic capabilities, not to invade anyone's personal biological information. She apologized if her medical procedures had seemed intrusive or threatening. Admiral Kethvar found himself in the surreal position of being apologized to by someone who could have disassembled him at the molecular level. The humans continued to display consideration and restraint even while demonstrating capabilities that made his military forces seem primitive by comparison. They could have easily destroyed his fleet, but instead they worried about violating his medical privacy. Ben Carter suggested that they return to the community center for more coffee and discussion. The afternoon demonstrations had provided concrete examples of human technology, but he suspected that their alien guests might have additional questions about colonial policies and strategic intentions. Open communication was essential for avoiding future misunderstandings that could lead to unnecessary conflicts. As they walked back toward the settlement, Admiral Kethvar reflected on everything he had witnessed. The humans had shown him technology that could move mountains, create stars, and manipulate matter at the quantum level. They had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded his wildest imagination while maintaining the casual demeanor of farmers discussing crop rotation schedules. Most disturbing of all was the gradual realization that the evening sun cast long shadows across Haven's Rest, as Admiral Kethvar sat in the community center trying to reconcile everything he had witnessed with his understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. His worldview had been systematically dismantled over the course of a single day by beings who treated planet-killing technology as household appliances. The humans sipped their coffee and chatted about harvest schedules while casually carrying devices that could unmake his entire civilization. Dr. Susan Walsh noticed the Admiral's troubled expression and asked if he had any remaining questions about human society or technology. She wanted to ensure that their alien guests understood the situation clearly before making any decisions about future interactions. Open communication was essential for building trust between species that had different cultural backgrounds and technological capabilities. Admiral Kethvar found himself asking the question that had been haunting him since the demonstrations began. If humans possessed such overwhelming power, why did they choose to live as simple farmers and teachers instead of conquering the galaxy like any rational species would do? The Zalari Empire had built its civilization on the principle that superior force naturally led to territorial expansion and resource acquisition. Old Pete Williams looked up from the piece of wood he had been carving with what the aliens now recognized as a contained plasma beam. His weathered hands moved carefully as he shaped the timber into what appeared to be a toy for one of the settlement's children. Pete had listened quietly to most of the day's conversations, but now he seemed ready to share his perspective on the Admiral's question. He asked the alien commander if he had ever experienced real warfare between opponents who possessed comparable destructive capabilities. Not the quick conquests of technologically inferior civilizations, but genuine conflicts where both sides had the power to annihilate each other completely. Pete's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the ultimate consequences of military thinking taken to its logical conclusion. Admiral Kethvar admitted that his experience was limited to asymmetric conflicts, where Zalari superiority ensured relatively quick victories. The Empire had built its expansion strategy around overwhelming technological advantages that minimized casualties and resistance. He had never faced opponents who could match or exceed his own military capabilities. Pete nodded sadly and explained that humans had spent centuries learning what happened when comparable forces collided without restraint. Earth's history included conflicts where entire continents were rendered uninhabitable and billions of people died in exchanges that lasted only minutes. Weapons development had eventually reached a point where victory became indistinguishable from mutual annihilation. The old farmer described wars where human factions possessed the ability to crack planets, extinguish stars, and unravel the fabric of space itself. Military strategies that seemed brilliant in theory proved catastrophic in practice when implemented with universe-ending technology. Eventually, both sides would exhaust themselves, destroying everything they had originally fought to control. Jake Morrison set down his coffee cup and added his own experiences from the conflicts that had shaped human military doctrine. He had served in battles where solar systems were sterilized as collateral damage from weapons that missed their intended targets. The psychological trauma of wielding such destructive power had convinced many veterans that strength without wisdom was just another form of madness. The humans had gradually discovered that possessing ultimate military superiority was meaningless if exercising that power destroyed everything worth protecting. Victory achieved through overwhelming force often left nothing but ashes and regret. True strength required the wisdom to know when power should not be used, even when using it would guarantee immediate tactical advantages. Ben Carter explained that the colonists of Haven's Rest represented a new approach to human civilization based on lessons learned from their species' violent past. They had chosen to apply their advanced technology toward creation rather than destruction. Building communities and raising families required the same scientific principles as developing weapons, but the results brought joy instead of suffering. Colony Administrator Carter emphasized that their choice of peaceful coexistence was not motivated by weakness or naivety. The humans understood exactly what they were capable of accomplishing through violence. Their restraint came from hard, earned wisdom about the true costs of conflict when waged with universe-reshaping technology. They had learned that some victories were not worth winning. Linda Pierce added that education was their most important tool for breaking the cycle of violence that had dominated human history. By teaching children to understand the universe through scientific exploration rather than military applications, they hoped to create generations that would choose cooperation over conquest. Knowledge should be used to build better societies, not more efficient methods of destroying them. The school teacher explained that her students learned about their species' violent past as a cautionary tale rather than a source of pride. They studied the principles behind their advanced technology, but focused on peaceful applications that improved life rather than ending it. Understanding how to create artificial stars was important for energy production, not for sterilizing enemy planets. Dr. Susan Walsh concluded by emphasizing that the humans of Haven's Rest genuinely preferred peaceful coexistence with their galactic neighbors. They would defend themselves if threatened, but they would much rather share their knowledge and resources with species that approached them with honest intentions. The choice between conflict and cooperation was entirely up to other civilizations. The doctor explained that human medical ethics included a fundamental principle about doing no harm to patients. This philosophy had gradually expanded to encompass their entire approach to interspecies relations. Their advanced technology could solve virtually any problem through either creative or destructive applications. Choosing creation over destruction was what separated civilization from barbarism. Frank Miller mentioned that his general store served customers from several different species who had established peaceful trading relationships with the human colony. These aliens had initially approached with caution, but had gradually learned that humans were more interested in cultural exchange than territorial expansion. Commerce and friendship were much more rewarding than conquest and subjugation. Carol Stone added that their engineering projects focused on improving life for everyone in the region rather than gaining strategic advantages over potential enemies. Moving mountains to optimize water flow benefited the entire ecosystem, including native wildlife and visiting alien traders. Cooperation produced better results than competition when dealing with complex environmental challenges. Young Danny Brooks spoke up from where he had been listening quietly to the adult conversation. He explained that his science projects were designed to solve real-world problems that affected his community. The gravitational field generator protected their settlement from asteroid impacts and severe weather. Creating useful technology was more satisfying than building weapons that hopefully would never be needed. Admiral Kethvar sat in silence as he processed the philosophical implications of everything the humans had shared. His entire military career had been based on the assumption that superior force naturally led to territorial expansion and resource acquisition. The humans had turned this logic completely upside down by demonstrating that true strength came from choosing restraint even when overwhelming power was available. The Admiral realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans represented a species that had progressed beyond the need to prove their superiority through conquest. They possessed technology that could reshape reality according to their will, but they chose to use that power for growing food and teaching children about the wonders of scientific discovery. He asked permission to contact his fleet and relay new instructions based on his improved understanding of the situation. The original mission parameters were no longer relevant given what he had learned about human capabilities and intentions. His government would need to develop entirely new diplomatic protocols for dealing with beings who could destroy civilizations but preferred to invite their enemies over for coffee and cookies. Ben Carter granted permission for the Admiral to communicate with his ships and suggested that the Zalari fleet was welcome to establish a temporary orbital station for conducting peaceful trade and cultural exchange. Haven's Rest had excellent agricultural products and unique technology that might be useful for other species. Building positive relationships would benefit everyone involved. As Admiral Kethvar prepared to leave the community center, Jake Morrison offered to pack some of his wife's homemade cookies for the alien delegation to take back to their ship. Lisa had specifically asked him to share her baking with their visitors because food was one of the best ways to demonstrate friendly intentions between different cultures. The Admiral accepted the cookies with genuine gratitude and promised to file a detailed report recommending that his government approach